Hey everyone, welcome back to Bodhi Tree Buddhism, class number 23 for our course on the Way to Buddhahood by the Venerable Master In Shun. So, last week we began on the next section of the text, which is looking at those Dharma teachings for practitioners with those three higher motivations. And those three higher motivations, while all slightly different, are mainly characterized by the goal of seeking liberation from samsara, from cyclic existence. So we started on that last week, and we just, as usual, at a pretty slow pace, just got into the few opening verses. We were talking about motivation, so we did a little refresher on the differences between the five vehicles in total. And remember, despite this common term used in English Buddhist idiom of vehicle, it just really means a particular path or a particular method of practice. And each of those is backed up by a different motivation. So we've got the first two, those who are motivated for happiness in this and future lives, be it as a human or as a divine being. Those are the first two. And then the next three are the paths of the so-called disciples who seek liberation for themselves as an arahant, the solitary awakened ones, the pratyeka Buddhas, and of course those on the Mahayana path seeking to attain the full awakening of a fully awakened Buddha. And that of course is the Bodhisattva path, the Mahayana path. So those are three motivations, and we were talking about like different types of people. So let's go back and pick up where we left off last time, shall we? Okay, into the text. So the section here is like the diversity of the hearers or the disciples. We talked a little bit about this term Śrāvakas. In Chinese, it's shengwen, literally sound hearers, which is a very strange sounding term if you look at it very literally. It means basically those that would hear the teachings from the Buddha. And the distinction there is that the Buddha doesn't hear the teachings of the Dharma from another person. He realizes it for himself. And likewise too for the pratyeka Buddhas. That was always one of the kind of the special features of the Buddha. He realized it himself. Now I'm going to note, already getting off topic and we haven't even started, one of those elements, of course, when the Buddha realized it for himself, is actually not quite that simple. During his own realization and seeing his own past lives, he can actually recollect teachings that he has received from Buddhas of the past. So there is that kind of element there too. Anyway, so let's look at these types of disciples that are seeking liberation. So last week we did 解脱道原理苦乐之二边顺摄乐行者在家修法行顺摄苦行者出家做沙门. We talked about the two extremes of mortification and self-mortification and sensual indulgence. And those are sort of typified in the story of the Buddha's life. Sensual indulgence is, of course, his time as the prince in the palace, and everything is so luxurious, and it's party, party, party. And then his first 6 years of spiritual cultivation, where he's engaging in all sorts of practices that, like basically deliberately starving yourself and sleeping on beds of nails and jumping in freezing cold pools from the Himalayan headwaters and baking yourself in the sun, out on the Gangetic plain in the middle of summer with a big fire burning in front of you, all this kind of stuff. Could go on, there's even more. Those are the two extremes, and the Buddha says, no, both of these are wrong, they don't lead to liberation. And remember, last week, I really wanted to emphasize that the two extremes aren't pleasure and pain. They're not pleasure and pain per se. Experiencing pleasure and pain is not a problem. Well, I mean, obviously experiencing pain can be a problem. That's not my point. The point is it's seeking after pleasure and seeking after pain. It's the seeking more than the experience itself. That's the real problem. And the belief, of course, that, say, self-mortification is liberating. Okay. Then we have these two sections here, the next two, to conform to and accommodate those who cultivate happiness, householders cultivate their Dharma practice, and to conform to and accommodate those who cultivate asceticism, renouncers of the household life become Shramana. So it's basically saying the first big distinction then of those on this path is between lay practitioners and monastic practitioners. Now, one of the main differences here is the association that lay life in general means married life, and this also includes sex life. That's kind of this general assumption of putting the idea of lay life together with that. Now, of course, literally, it doesn't have to be that way. One could be a lay person, not renounce, and not necessarily be married, etc., etc. Again, but this is just these general categories. And then one of the basic rules for the monastic community is, of course, celibacy. Now, it's not just that. It also, if we basic practice, it starts from 5 precepts and builds up from there. There are no restrictions in general about, say, food you eat, clothing you wear, the kind of place that you live in, the kind of car you drive, and so on and so forth. And it's important to note, and I'd like to make this distinction as against some particular teachings, say like in Christianity, the idea that like a rich man will no sooner enter heaven than a camel will pass through the eye of a needle. Now, that often gets interpreted as wealth is an obstacle. Buddhism doesn't say wealth is an obstacle. Wealth is not an obstacle. It's not the wealth. It's not that thing out there that's obstacle. It's attitude towards it and craving towards it. So that's the important thing to keep in mind here, right? Poverty does not equal holiness. Wealth does not equal worldliness. Just the other day, went out to visit a friend who lives in a very beautiful house. It's just like wonderful. And that family are a very deeply spiritual and religious family. They've got like their own beautiful little shrine within that house. So you can see that, like I said, wealth and the trappings of the household life do not equal sort of worldliness and go away from the Dharma. And poverty doesn't equal sort of spirituality. It's the state of mind, it's the mentality. So that's that first category there. Basically the householder life, where you can enjoy some of those things and experience them. It's just a matter of don't just keep an eye on that craving. Don't let it get out of hand, of course. And then the second category says those who cultivate asceticism, and they become renouncers of the household life. So we often have this term that we use in Buddhism, renunciant and renunciation. I mean, it is an English word, but like in Buddhism, it becomes this very like common word. It's connected with some of the other words. There's a range of words that are used to describe what we often translate, say, monastics. And so some of them, like parivrajaka and so forth, are really, it is like renunciation. You set something aside, you discard something, you leave it, you abandon it. There's some other terms as well. One of the terms is right in the text here, Shramana, comes from a term meaning a striver. So somebody who strives. It's a bit like a seeker in a way. I think we often use the term in English like a spiritual seeker. Somebody is seeking, they're striving on the path. That's probably a good way of understanding the term Shramana. And of course, the most common one for Buddhism, bhikshu and bhikshuni, the masculine and the feminine, which literally means like a beggar, but it means somebody who lives on alms food. So alms food is what the lay community sort of donate and give to the spiritual seekers, and that's how they survive. They don't have employment, they don't make money, they don't produce their own food and all these kinds of things as well. They set those aside. And we've spoken earlier, I believe, about the common relationship between the lay community and the monastic community. The lay community provides material resources, typically 4 things: food, clothing, shelter, and medicine, some medical supplies, to the renunciant monastic community. And those Shravmanas, those seekers who have left aside the household life, they in turn provide spiritual nourishment to the lay community. So both categories of these can be on the path to liberation. That's the key thing here. Now, one thing I would like to also add just in this passage is, particularly those of you that might be following the Chinese, the first line up here, it's got these 2 characters here, ku and le. And so literally pain and happiness, or pain and pleasure. but I've rendered it here self-mortification and sensual indulgence. And part of the reason for this is over here we've also got le, happiness, and here we've got suffering. Because otherwise it seems to be saying like pain and pleasure are the two extremes, but then those who cultivate or practice pleasure and those who cultivate and practice pain. But wait, didn't you say pleasure and pain were like two extremes? So we're going to be a bit careful here. And so both of these terms, you can talk about those who practice pleasure in a negative sense, which is really like sensual indulgence. But you can also talk about it just like, sometimes it also gets taught as like the comfortable path, which is just lay practice. It doesn't necessarily mean like heavy sensual indulgence. And then this term 苦行者 or 苦行 can be self-mortification in a bad sense, where you're deliberately seeking pain. Like deliberately seeking pain, thinking the more pain I experience, the more bad karma I burn off. But within Buddhism, you've also got 苦行, as here I've translated as asceticism. And Buddhism has its own forms of asceticism. And these aren't a problem. Okay, I hope this isn't getting too confusing. So this term 苦行, I just want to talk about that a little bit more. I got a little bit of a peeve about this because the exact same term gets used in like a negative sense as something that Buddhism eschews in the sense of self-mortification, those old Indian like sense. But I mean, it's not just Indian Buddhism that has this, you know, say some Christian traditions of like self-flagellation, you know, using like ropes with knots, whipping yourself, you know, I think might be related to like the emulation of the passion of Christ and the Christ being whipped, suffering and pain as a way to experiencing the divine. That kind of thing in Buddhism, nah. But sometimes the exact same term, 苦行, is also used to just refer to this, what is compared to lay life, quite a hardcore ascetic lifestyle of being a monk or a nun. You know, so the living without family support, although you do have monastic support around you, you have very simple clothing, your possessions are very, very few, if anything. You live off very basic food, your whole lifestyle is like super, super simple. And that's kind of a Buddhist form of asceticism. Now, the biggest difference in between these two, so what makes some form of asceticism like not profitable from a Buddhist point of view, and what makes some of it profitable? Simple, comes down to, is it about a desire or is it not about a desire? Or is it about some kind of thing that you desire, or is it something that you're getting rid of desire? So the ones that are about it, when you're deliberately seeking pain, thinking that's going to help you, meh, throw that away. And the other one is a lifestyle that is like super, super simple, reducing your desires, particularly your material desires. That is like, okay, that's the good one. So, okay, I've had my little rave about this topic now. Time to move on, Matt. Keep on going. So bottom point of these two, the path to liberation avoids the two extremes of seeking pain as a form of liberation and also sensual indulgence. These are the two extremes. So we seek a middle way where you're not seeking either of them. So it's not seeking, that's the key bit. But you still have those who have a comfortable way of practice with family and other material trappings. There's a householder path for liberation. And then there's also those who seek this like super, super simple lifestyle of really reducing material desires and possessions in the world. And then this is the life of the spiritual seeker, which is different from and forsakes the household life. Okay, we've got a couple more categories here, so let's have a look at these. Don't know how much we can cover today, but let's have a look-see. Number 62, 自或乐独住，或乐人间住. They may delight in a solitary lifestyle or delight in a community lifestyle. So this was another big thing in Indian Buddhism, and it actually goes through right up until the present. For those who wish to, this is mainly with reference actually to monastics, but it could also be the same. I mean, you can be a solitary, non-ordained person. and you can be a very community-focused, ordained person. So some people just delight in a solitary lifestyle. Like, yeah, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, right? They're not into a lot of social things. They like to kind of be alone or have kind of minimal contact. This just kind of comes down to personality. Some people very sociable, some others not. Some people find that social element helps them, spurs them in their practice, and practicing together with others. And others find that having all those people around just kind of like sort of agitates or might even make them anxious or something, or just is a distraction, like too much going on in your head. So these are your two categories. Now, it's also worth pointing out in this little verse here, that second line, or delight in a community lifestyle, I mean, that's how I'm going to translate it here in English. It's 火乐人间住. Now, these two characters here, 人间, very, very famous in this text. Why? Because these two characters here, 人间, hey, this one and this one, thank you very much. Literally, people space. People space. It's these two characters that are also the basic translation of humanistic in the phrase humanistic Buddhism. So humanistic Buddhism is 人间佛教. So human space, or you could say like human between, but between I mean like the sphere of something, the space around people, and the sphere of humanity, shall we say, 佛教 Buddhism. So often this line here gets pulled out and cited when people want to talk about Venerable Master Inshu's contribution to humanistic Buddhism. And of course many others use exactly the same term. There is this same term, renjian, that appears in the very early sutras, in the Agama Sutras in the Chinese translation. And a lot of people are very interested, what does this mean? Particularly those who want to track down this idea that the historical Buddha, particularly as recorded in the Agamas, the early canon, has this idea of like humanistic Buddhism, but it's kind of not that simple. Whether or not this should be called humanistic is another matter of debate. There are some other terms for humanistic, and like humanism in Chinese, 人本主义, which is like people, foundation, and 主义 is like an ism. We talk about Buddhism like an ideology, shall we say? It's like principle, main idea, 主义, main idea or main thought or main principle or ideology, if you like. So the ideology that things should be rooted in people, which goes along with kind of the idea of like humanism. Anyway, there's some technical stuff about it, but the main gist of this line is practitioners may practice kind of in a more solitary way, or they may practice in a community lifestyle. There is some evidence of, even in early Buddhist communities, that there's often a bit of tension between these two groups. Sometimes those that practice by themselves think that others that practice in a community must necessarily sort of be caught up in too much social stuff to really have any depth in their practice. But then those who practice in a community often think that those who practice in a solitary way, like they can only do it by themselves, and then their practice has no real it's like they think they're very cultivated and very developed, but as soon as they have to interact with other people, their practice just falls apart. But I really think the main difference, it's more of a matter of psychology and temperament, and we'd be far better off just working out what works best for us and accepting what may or may not work better for others, rather than using this as sort of like a position to criticize others and say, oh, because they're practicing like that, that's not very good. Hey, I mean, look after your own practice. Most modern. Okay, number 63. We've got two more categories of practitioners here, which is again a bit of a sort of a psychological / intellectual basis. 或是随信行, 或是随发行. They may practice according to faith or practice according to the Dharma. Now, this again is a distinction that appears in the early canon. So the technical terms for these, 随信行, are Shrad Anusarin, and sway fasting is Dhamma Anusarin. So Anusara just means one who practices according, and both of these terms. So one who practices according to faith or practices according to Dharma. Now the Buddha kind of acknowledges that most people are in the former category and a fewer number are in the second category. So most people's practice is based on faith. The one who practices according to Dharma is also sometimes said as according to wisdom. So we all have different, shall we say, spiritual faculties. Buddhism, I'm talking about 5 faculties. We've got faith, we've got mindfulness, we've got effort, we've got concentration, we've got wisdom or insight. So these are the 5, and we all have these in greater or lesser amounts. In order to be liberated, we don't need to like max out all 5. Some people will have one that's particularly strong and that will lead their practice, but you still need some amount of all of them, shall we say. So most people are according to faith, and that, you know, if you go to most temples, you know, you find the devotees are working there and they're doing some stuff. They say, well, what are you doing? And, you know, we're doing such and such. Oh, why are you doing that? And they'll say, because Shifu told us to, because the master told us to. And that might be monk or a nun or something like that. And so if the venerable one tells us to do it, then we do it. Now, of course, it's not blind faith. I mean, they do that because they always have great respect for that teacher that they're following. You know, they don't just do that for any monastic, believe me. So they'll find, you know, when you find a great teacher, and you see the depth of their own cultivation and the way in which they're able to help others. So, well, you know, this person knows what they're doing. And if they if they encourage me to do something or tell me to do something, then probably it's a good thing to do. And we do that more than we probably admit, you know, just outside even the religious sphere. There's lots of things in life that we do because authoritative people tell us to do it. Now, some people are like, oh, I never, you know, don't always just follow authority. If you really examine your life, yeah, there will still be certain things. We don't all like fully intellectually examine every single aspect of our lives as much as we might want to think that we do. The second category, though, doesn't really do something because a person tells them to do it. They need to like understand it first. They need to understand. Once they understand it, then they'll go about doing it. And this is like a sort of a more of a minority. Now, there is kind of a distinction between these two in the sense that practice according to Dharma is also like practice according to wisdom or understanding. And ultimately, to be liberated, you do need that wisdom and insight. So if you've got faith, that becomes a foundation upon which to develop the other faculties like insight and wisdom, right, and concentration and all the rest. But if you've got that insight to begin with, it can be a bit faster. So although these are 2 basic like temperaments and personality types, in a way, the practice according to Dharma is the superior. It really is the one that you want to head to, but that's not to say that practice according to faith is wrong. And again, something got a little bit of a thing I want to drive home, message I want to drive home. We're often told in, you know, outside of Asia that Buddhism is sort of, it's never about faith. It's never about belief. It's always about insight and seeing for yourself. No, that really is an exaggeration. It's, you know, it often comes about that sort of the contrast of Buddhism versus Christianity, because it's a different tradition. Whatever Christianity is, Buddhism must, you know, just ipso facto be the opposite of that. And people say, well, most Christian traditions place a great emphasis on faith, therefore Buddhism is like anti-faith. But it really is, it's really not that simple. The vast majority of Buddhists practice by faith, and the Buddha says it's okay. The Buddha did not reject this at all. So it's not a bad thing. And again, don't use this as a criticism of other people in your practice. You work out which of these you are yourself and work towards it. And if you want to help other people, try to see which category they are and then use that to help them too. That's really what this kind of distinction of personality types is about here. Okay, so it's another important distinction. And that distinction isn't necessarily a distinction between lay and monastic as well. Same with this one here, like the solitary versus communal. practice according to faith or according to Dharma, this is not the same as the lay monastic. It's not that, oh, devotees are all by faith and renunciants are by Dharma. Not at all. Not at all. Okay, last but not least, we've got line 64. Hope we can finish it for today. 随父种种性，同修出离行. Although there are many different temperaments, they alike cultivate the practice of renunciation. Now, renunciation here again doesn't mean the monastic community, because lay practitioners can also be on the path to liberation. So renunciation here is renunciation of your afflictions, renunciation of all attachments, renunciation of ignorance, and as a result of that, renunciation of samsara itself, the end of cyclic existence. So sort of saying, there are many different temperaments and many different personality types, and they'll all engage in the Dharma a little bit differently. There are many other categories, like personality type categories that are talked about in other Buddhist texts. The ones that we've talked about here today are just a couple of the big ones, the major ones. But no, they all alike cultivate the practice of renunciation, and it's very useful for us to see that, be aware of what type we are ourselves, and therefore we can find practices that work better for that personality type. And also when we see others, really important to acknowledge that others might have the same goal, but they might be on a slightly different path, and that's good, that's fine. Now, it's not to say that all paths lead to the same result, because this kind of universalist idea, I'm not necessarily convinced by it. It's like saying, all causes lead to the same result. How can they? All seeds will lead to the same tree. No. But you can have multiple slightly different paths that do lead to the same result. Right? There can be multiple paths up a mountain. It's not the same as all paths also go up the mountain. Okay, so that's kind of what we've got to cover today. All comes under this category of the diversity of the hearers, those who are seeking liberation. And they are one of these three vehicles leading to liberation from samsara. All based on this motivation that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent, all conditioned phenomena are dissatisfactory, and therefore we turn away from all conditioned phenomena. We turn away from all the comings and goings, the highs and lows, the beauty, the terror of cyclic existence, and turn toward the path of liberation. So, not sure what you are doing today on your, probably it's on a Saturday when you're watching this, but you can make that intention. Going to liberate myself, if you want to add, and liberate others from cyclic existence and all the sufferings that go with it, and have that as our driving motivation for the day, and that will set you off in a good frame of mind. So thanks for joining us for class today. As usual, if you've got any comments, throw them below and I'll get back to you. Meanwhile, take care, and I'll see you again next week. Bye bye.